Senator Allen from the great state of Virginia. I want to ask you about another of these customs of the United States Senate, and that's the reading of George Washington's farewell address. It's my understanding it's done annually, somewhere near February 22nd, George Washington's birthday. Now, I believe it's been done continuously since probably about 1890. There were a few other times prior to that, but it's my understanding continuously since 1890. So you delivered that, I believe, your first year in the United States Senate. You were chosen to give the speech, deliver it, whatever, recite it, whatever be the proper verb for that, and do it. If you could share what is the sense of the Senate, the purpose in doing that, to honor and do it, and to what you brought to it, what you felt were your responsibilities in delivering that and doing it in a proper manner.
Well, it is a longtime tradition in the Senate, and they alternate apparently every other year. Patrick Moynihan read George Washington's farewell address in the year 2000, around February 22nd. And so then I was selected as the Republican to read it in February of 2001. And then the purpose is to remember George Washington, the father of our country in many respects, his self-discipline, his dignity, his integrity, the fact that he could have been king, but he said, I'm not going to serve any more than 2 terms. And so being from Virginia, reading George Washington's farewell address is a tremendous honor. And it's a reminder to us about those principles. And you read every single word of it. Now, some speeches, his farewell address, by the way, those speeches were not necessarily speeches. They were to be read. And some of the words he uses are different than words that are in common parlance these days. But those same principles apply. And in fact, you just think of February of 2001 was before September 11th, 2001. And at that point, it was 50-50 in the Senate.
And that is when, so we're clear, and that is when you delivered the speech in February of 2001.
Yeah, before 9/11 hit, and how different our country was before that terrible day. The other interesting thing about it is that there's a journal that everyone who delivers that farewell address, George Washington's farewell address, writes their thoughts in a journal, and it is kept as part of posterity and history with it. And it's and I wrote down some of my thoughts about having the honor of that reading of George Washington's farewell address, and how important it is. And I still think it's relevant today in many respects. Obviously, the treaties, we have treaties with NATO and so forth, but George Washington really did set the example for our country of honesty, integrity, dignity, and self-restraint in serving in office.
Well, I took it upon myself to read that inclusion you added into the Senate records and have a quotation, a part of yours. If I may read that, I'd particularly.
Yeah, by the way, it's actually handwritten. It's very old style. It's not as if you put in an email or type it. You actually have to write it in the journal in your own hand writing. And so if you can read my handwriting, Sam, good for you.
Well, you and I may be of the era that we understand the term penmanship when it was taught in school. Not sure some youngsters, because I guess in today's world with emails, who needs penmanship? But certainly that was a very rigorous topic when I was in grade school and things like that. And I imagine it's the case with yourself. But yes, I was able to read it, like to quote it, and particularly like you to comment on that, both from when you said it then, and as you'll hear in my reading, it applies really in today's world as well. You said you had part of a sentence, and then you say that speaking of Washington, his leadership and his thoughts, we should use this and his thoughts to then guide us, quote, open quote, excuse me, guide us to adhere to foundational principles of freedom rather than excessive partisan intractability. Now, you said that, as you say, in February of 2001. Now, here we are in 2023. I think all observers across the political spectrum would say that things have gotten a trifle more partisan than they were in 2001. But your thoughts then when you put that in, and how do you see that guidance, to use the word, Washington's guidance applying in today's world?
Well, I think is the advice, and that time I wrote in there, it was a 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate at that time. And so it was really tense on, who's going to be chair and this, that, and the other committees. But the advice of George Washington were to hire principals, and that we're serving as United States senators. The owners of the people, the owners of the government are the people, and we ought to be looking out for the best interests of the people of our country. And obviously, each person has their own philosophy of government and what they think is appropriate for government to do or not do. And we want freedom from government and the liberty to do what we want, so long as we're not harming someone else. Those are all important principles. It's how you get there, and that matters. But if you think of it, a higher sense of duty and service, as George Washington did, I think that gets people acting, hopefully, more in the best interest of everyone, rather than the intractability of getting into your own partisan corners and not getting anything done because of obstinance or obstruction or just ham-handedness in dealing with things. And so that's what I was trying to do, and that's the reason I think it's all read, is that people think back to the founding of our country, and there's probably no greater person as an example of dignity, of honor, of integrity than George Washington. And so I thought that applied then. And by the way, Sam, you said it's gotten a trifle more partisan. It's gotten more than a trifle more. It's gotten a whole lot more partisan. In fact, I talked to some of the folks I served with in the Senate, and they said, "Oh, it's gotten so much worse." And I thought it was terrible then. And I got in trouble one time for saying that they were asking me to compare being a senator and a governor. And I said, "Oh, heck, as governor, I'd make more decisions in one morning as you make all week in the Senate." I said, "It moves at the pace of a wounded sea slug." And so they said, "Are you kidding? They just go on and they don't do anything." Or I shouldn't say they don't do anything. They just are just so balkanized into parties, which is a shame. And this is one of the things that George Washington warned about as well, is excessive partisanship. And even Thomas Jefferson worried about it. All of the founders did. And so the members of the Senate, members of the House of Representatives, president, everyone who's a public servant needs to rise above petty partisanship and do what's right. Stick to your principles, keep your promises, always act with integrity, but work to get things accomplished to improve opportunities or security for the people who are the owners of the government.
Well, you've been on the Senate floor many times, and I guess you would say that a spirited debate is fine.
Yeah,
but
great.
still get something constructive done.
Right.
And balancing that, I guess, is a challenge. But I guess it's gotten to be more of a challenge as time's gone along.
Well, still, you have to be of goodwill, and you stick to your principles, you keep your promises, don't do anything unethical. Sometimes you just can't get everything you want. So what you have to do is find a consensus. Where can you agree? Ronald Reagan would talk about it. He said, "I can't get a whole loaf of bread. Well, I'll get 3/4 of it and come back for the other quarter later." And the Senate's a very collegial group of folks. And I think there were times and you have to pair up. So often it's got to be bipartisan. And I'm not going to go through some of the people who on the other side who we would agree on 1 out of 100 issues, but that one issue we agreed on, all right, let's get that done. We'll continue to differ on the other 99. And if you have more of that being done, I think our country benefits from it rather than just saying, well, you're on the other side, so I can't talk to you. I ended up being a good friend, partnering with Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon. If someone told me you and Ron Wyden are really going to end up being good pals working together in the Senate, I said, Ron Wyden, are you kidding? Well, we ended up being great allies fighting discriminatory taxes on the internet. We ended up working together on the National Nanotechnology Initiative, worked on various other things. Most of the time we disagreed on everything else, but he'd come over to me and he'd say, hey, Georgie, can you help me on such and such a bill? I said, oh, no, Ron, I'm not with you. He says, okay, good. Sorry. And I'd be the same way with him. And so you build up those relationships and you find folks that don't hold grudges and try to find out where you can agree and move things forward in a positive, constructive way.
Again, a lot of insight here on this, all the way from Washington to the present. That's covering an awful lot in several minutes, Governor. And thank you again, as always. Thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure.